Hello everybody, welcome again at the ninth session already of the Getting Technical event. Today we are going to talk about economic machining. And those who were at the previous session here remember perhaps that then we talked about machining economics. Now machining economics we define then as a science where we work with optimization scenarios for machining processes and machining systems, and there are different scenarios possible. Perhaps you remember when you were there, otherwise you can view the registrations if you are interested. We define several scenarios which are possible: energy efficient machining, green machining, reliable machining, and one of them was also called economic machining. Economic machining is a scenario where we focus on costs and time, where we focus on how can we do machining in such a way that we reach lowest possible machining costs, and or how can we set up a machining process that we maximize our production, that we maximize the output we generate with the machining process. And that's called economic machining, and that's the subject of today. Machining is something with two faces. You know my opinion on that. Machining is on the one hand you have the technical stuff, and that's fun. Everybody likes to do those types of things when machining. That's when we talk about tools and feeds and speeds and all that type of stuff. But machining also has an economical side. Machining is a process we use in the industry to produce workpieces. Workpieces we intend to sell to customers. So that's the economic side of machining, and sometimes people think, that's perhaps, you know, that's not for technical people and so on. But I don't agree with that opinion. I think a true machining expert, of course, needs to be an expert in the technical side of machining, but a true machining expert also have to understand the economic side and how we can influence things. And in the last session, I asked everybody, which scenario do you think is most important? Which scenario out of all the scenarios we described in machining economics should be the driver, should be the one that drives things? And 3/4 of you selected economic machining, and I think that's correct, because, you know, to work cost efficient, to work time efficient, everything needs to be okay. Everything needs to be in order. It's where everything comes together. And as always, I'm not alone. I'm the one you see on the screen, but I have my 3 colleagues with me that are in control of all the technical stuff here, and there are even a lot more people here, because I don't know if you are aware of, but this week we have a quite big event going on social media, but I explain a little bit later, and that's why so many people are here now to support that event. But let's now focus for a while on economic machining. And economic machining, first of all, there are some conditions that needs to be fulfilled. There are some conditions without it's impossible to talk about economic machining. One is the people. And it's perhaps strange that I start with that, but economic machining is impossible to realize if you can't count on experienced and skilled machining experts, because machining is a thing that has so many elements, so many variables interfere, and now and then things go a little bit crazy, and then you need somebody to take care of that, and that's the importance of experienced and skilled machining experts. They should know how the process goes, how the process creates value for customers, how the process creates correct workpieces. They should know how it goes, and more important, they should recognize if something fails, if something does not fulfill expectations, and they should be the ones also capable of modifying things so everything goes back to as it is supposed to be. Another thing which is important is that in an objective way, you must be capable of judging how did the process go. And there are all kinds of things we can take here. Something we developed and that seems to give very good results is something what we refer to as a unified global tool deterioration analysis. Because a used tool, if you know what to look for, can tell you a lot. You can learn a lot from a used tool. And that is next to people that know what they are doing when we talk about machining. You also need processes, routines in place that gives you the possibility in a more objective manner to verify if things went according to planning. So people, an objective way of measuring how the process quality was, to which extent the process did deliver up to expectations. You also need, and this is a very important thing, you need something to bridge the technical side of machining with the economic side of machining. You need a bridge between the two. You need something that connects the two. And that connection is today still something what we refer to as Taylor's principle. Taylor was an American who lived more than 100 years ago and who was just trying to do that. He tried to connect the technicalities of machining with the economic side of machining, and he found quite a lot of things that makes it possible to connect the two. So we need that bridge, we need a connection, we need to understand how the connection works. And if we have these three in place, then we can start talking about economic machining. We can use as an optimization scenario the economic things, the costs, and the time. Cost efficiency, time efficiency. And the previous session we defined this table, or this diagram rather, where we said, okay, if we look to cost aspects on machining, you have fixed costs and you have variable costs. Fixed costs are defined as costs which do not change if you modify the way you do your machining. That's the costs that do not change if you change the tooling, if you change the machining strategy, if you change the cutting conditions. The costs are fixed. Next to that you have variable costs, and that is what this graph shows us. Variable costs are the costs which do modify if you change how you do your machining. The horizontal line here in this diagram represents cutting condition selection, to make it rather concrete. So you have selected a tool, you selected a strategy, and then you start playing with your cutting conditions. And what we see is that variable costs, the two main variable costs relate, one to the tool itself, to the tooling equipment, and the other one refers to the machine tool equipment. Now, if you have a situation where you increase, what you see is that tooling costs go up, because tool life is getting shorter. That means you need to buy more tools to do the same number of workpieces, so tooling costs go up, machining costs go down, the two added together, but those are the two big families of variable costs, gives you the total cost, and total cost, there is somewhere a set of cutting conditions that leads to minimum machining costs. If you look to productivity, of course, when you increase your cutting conditions, productivity goes up, but not endlessly. Because if you continue to increase your cutting conditions, what you find is that from a certain point on, if you further increase cutting conditions to where you were, tool life is getting so short that the theoretical increase in productivity you would have due to increased cutting conditions is compensated, is more than compensated in a negative manner then, by time you lose due to the fact that you have to replace tools very often. And that's the moment the productivity line, the black line in the diagram here, turns back downwards. Somewhere there is a set of cutting conditions that gives you maximum productivity. That we defined during the previous session. We said, okay, if we go for economic machining as a scenario, it's all about finding out in a certain application, how should I organize my machining process, which tool should I select, which strategy should I select, which set of cutting conditions should I select to go or towards minimum cost or go towards maximum productivity, but anyways, be somewhere there in the neighborhood. That's what we talked about previous time. Now I want to go one step further, and sorry for the mathematics here. I come back to the mathematical aspect in machining, but here for the time being, stay with me. Don't be afraid too much about the formula. A formula is no more than a symbolic writing of a certain principle, because what the formula says here is that if you want to find that set of cutting conditions that gives you minimum cost, you should find a set of cutting conditions that leads to a certain tool life. A tool life which is referred to as the economical tool life. The tool life that your tool should have, that your cutting edge should have, that would lead to minimum costs for the machining cost we talk now. And that tool life is depending on the first factor here in this formula, is depending on the combination workpiece material selected cutting tool. And that economic tool life is also depending on the tool cost. That's the thing, the kg symbol in the formula. And it's also depending on the machine cost. The two variables in this equation, tool cost and machine cost. That's the two things we work with. So this thing says, if you want to go for minimum cost, make sure that you select your cutting conditions for the tool you have selected as such that the tool life represents a certain value. And that's why I said we need a bridge between things, because tool life, economic tool life, is an economic factor. It has to do with costs. It has nothing to do with technical stuff. It's just costs. So, and bridge between life, an economic tool life, and a set of cutting conditions, which is the technical side. Which set of cutting conditions should I select so that my cost is minimum? And well, let's work with an example just to give you an idea. And again, don't worry about the mathematics here. I just want to give you an illustration that it is possible. This is not magic, you know. Sometimes people say, "Oh, from where does this come?" This is logical thing. It's just mathematical thing. Now imagine that you have a situation where a machine cost is, and I use euro here for those who are in situations where the coin unit is different from euro. Yeah, you can translate into your own coins. But for Western Europe, this represents a rather average situation. A machine hourly rate of 100 euro per hour. That's the cost people take into account to pay for the machine tool. And a salary cost for an operator of around 18 euro per hour. Also, that is kind of an average good value. For those who say, no, but my situation is different, yeah, okay, you can use this of course for your own situation. The next thing is a little bit perhaps more tricky, but what this says is that a tool costs, cutting edge costs, that's the first element in this sum. It's depending on the cutting edge support costs. That's the second element here. One could say, if I try to make it as concrete as possible, the first one is the cutting edge cost, the insert cutting edge cost. The second one is the tool holder cost that we take into consideration. And the third thing in this sum is the costs related to changing an insert after it's used out, the tool indexing cost. Now, that deserves perhaps a little bit of explaining. Why do we take into account here tool changing cost? Because it is a fully integral part of tool costs. Because a tool is not only you have to buy something, but a tool is also, after a while, when it's used out, you have to replace it by something new. That's why we add tool changing costs in this equation. If I take some average values, again, here the calculation is not so important, it's just an illustration. But for an average situation, again, for an average insert, an average tool holder, here in Western Europe, if we apply this, we end up with a cost of around €11 per tool life, per whatever minutes it cuts. And if I apply the formula then, that means that I should find, in this example, in this situation, I should find a set of cutting conditions that gives me around 17 minutes tool life. Now that's 17 minutes. What is 17 minutes? Well, 17 minutes is the tool life you should have so that the costs related to the machining operation are minimized. So be careful with this 17 minutes. Sometimes people say, yeah, and if I have 20 minutes, is that bad? But that depends. From a technical perspective, of course it's not bad. Why should that? But from an economic perspective, 20 minutes would mean that your tool life is too long. And that you lose money due to that. You are too careful with your tool. If you would have a tool life of 11 minutes, again the question could be, is that bad? No, it's not bad from a technical perspective. But it would not be good from an economic perspective. So that is the notion of economic tool life. It is a tool life which is defined from economic considerations, not from technical considerations. The mathematics for tool life, because we can use the same philosophy when we talk about maximum production. Maximum production meaning the output per time unit needs to be maximized. I use my time as effective as possible to generate output. Well, the set of cutting conditions you need to apply to have maximum output, maximum productivity. Also, that set of cutting conditions is governed by a wanted tool life. In this case, we call it the tool life for maximum production. And that tool life for maximum production, again, the formula, don't worry about the formula, it's just a symbolic writing. The tool life for maximum production is again depending, that's the first factor here, on the workpiece material you machine and the tool you use. And is also, and now it's getting interesting, now it's getting really interesting, the only other variable that you need to take into consideration to maximize your productivity. So the only other factor that steers, that drives the tool life you want, is the tool indexing time. And I find that so intriguing, and I explain you directly. Let me first give you an example. Imagine you have a situation again, you have a certain tool, you have a certain workpiece material, and imagine that you manage to change a tool. So you recognize you have end of tool life, you need to index the cutting edge, you need to change the cutting edge, and that takes you 3 minutes. That would mean, if I apply my little formula, that tool life for maximum productivity is 9 minutes in this example. 9 minutes. And I find this so intriguing because everybody is looking for maximum productivity. Everybody is interested in optimizing productivity. I want more output. Delivery times are under pressure, all that type of stuff. So everybody's chasing productivity, and everything around the machining process has been automized, digitized if you want. Workpiece manipulation, you have a pallet changer. Tool manipulation, you have a tool changer. Automatic measuring cycles. People optimize their cutting conditions to have fast production, but the only thing left to be done manual is tool indexing. And it's that one single thing that drives productivity. You have it in your own hands. How fast or how slow you manage to change your tools is deciding how productive you are. And I refer to this also a little bit. You remember last session I talked a bit about the butterfly effect. A butterfly effect, which in physics is when people say, if people find out that a detail that nobody thinks on is, as a matter of fact, the most important factor that steers something, well, such a butterfly thing in machining is tool indexing. Because, you know, in all the projects I did over the years in all those different countries, when I asked people, how fast can you change an insert? People say, I don't know. Fast. Yeah, and if I say, yeah, how fast? Oh, you know, fast. Yeah, but this is the one that steers your productivity. And you don't know. Because imagine that the 3 minutes here, imagine that somebody said, 3 minutes, I can do it in 2 minutes. What does that mean? Well, it means that your tool life for maximum production instead of 9 minutes would be 6 minutes. And you know what it means if you go from 9 minutes to 6 minutes, how that influences your cutting conditions? Well, and that's the bridge we need from Taylor. You remember in the beginning I said we need a bridge between the technical side and the economic side. Well, the economic side now says I go from 9 minutes to 6 minutes, that's what I want. Well, the technical side then says, through the bridge from Taylor, that if you, instead of 9 minutes, you go to 6 minutes tool life, you can increase your cutting conditions by 10 to 15%. That means that your machining productivity goes up by 10 to 15%. A detail. I can do my tool indexing instead of 9 minutes, I do it in 3 minutes, I do it in 2 minutes. That increases your productivity by 10%. Simple. But it's butterfly effect because people, yeah, they don't know. So what we learn from this is, we said in the previous session, there are different scenarios possible to optimize machining processes depending on what you want. The scenario that is most probably the most complete, as it unites all the others, is cost and time efficiency. That scenario is referred to as economic machining. And economic machining, we defined it slightly, and I added now some details, what I try to say here. And again, the time is too short, and this is not the channel also to dive deep into all the mathematics behind all of this. But what I wanted to illustrate you is that it is possible, once you have your targets established, and targets is minimum cost, could be maximum productivity, that leads to a certain selection of tool, strategy, machining strategy, and cutting conditions. And that's the bridge we need to make all the time, and that's the role that a machinist plays. That is the role that a machining expert plays. Combining those two, making sure that everything is in line with expectations. Now, what I want to do here is just for you to think a little bit together with me on once we know that, what can we do with that? How can we take advantage from that? But imagine now you have a situation and you have certain variables, and you have established somewhere a set of cutting conditions that gives you minimum cost. Fine, okay. But now we are suddenly confronted, and I suppose a lot of you are confronted with that, with the increased energy costs. And energy costs are part of the machine hourly cost. And if energy costs go up, that means machine hourly costs go up. And my question is, me as a machinist, how can I tackle that? How can I do something here? So if you have a situation where due to risen energy costs, your machine hourly rate goes up, how should you react as a machinist? What will the costs do, and how can you work with that? Well, perhaps, and I invite everybody, because this really, I try to make this as lively as possible. Write in the chat, write your opinions there. My colleagues here will collect all the opinions, and in the last part we can have some interesting discussions, hopefully. But, you know, if your energy costs go up, don't dream. If your energy costs go up, your machining costs go up. That's what it is, yeah. But me as a machinist, can I do something? Can I partly, hopefully at least, compensate? Well, yes, we can. You as a machinist, if you are in this situation, what you should do is you should increase your cutting conditions. And I use this as an example. People, if people don't really, I should not say don't think, but if people react automatically, they say, oh, energy costs go up, we have to slow down when we do machining so we consume less energy and so on. No! You should do just the opposite. If you are confronted with increased energy cost, as an example, that would lead to increased machine costs, I should be very clear in what I say, machine tool costs. What you need to do if you want to minimize the impact of that increased energy cost is you should increase your cutting conditions. I don't say you can always fully compensate, but at least you can try to make the best out of it. Another situation could be, again, imagine you have a certain situation and you have established a certain set of cutting conditions that gives you minimum cost, and then suddenly your supplier comes with annual price increase, the famous annual price increase. So your tool suddenly is more expensive. What would that mean for your machining costs? And how should you, as a machining expert, react on that? What is there something you can do here? And again here, write some things in the chat, and let's see afterwards if we can have an interesting discussion on this potential scenario. So you are doing economic machining, you have your minimum cost, and suddenly somebody tells you, as from now on, your tools are more expensive. Yeah. Again here, don't dream. If your tools are getting more expensive, your machining costs go up. It's what it is. But again, you as a machining expert, if you think on the principles of economic machining, is there something you can do? Yes, there is. And again here, it's very strange, because normally people think, if tools are more expensive, I should increase my cutting conditions so I use my tools more efficient. No! When we talk about costs, and that's what we discuss here, if you are confronted with more expensive tools, you should reduce your cutting conditions to compensate, at least partly, for the increased costs. And perhaps you have some problems here. It's strange. Again, I invite you, let's stay in contact here. We can talk afterwards about these principles. What if you are confronted with a workpiece material with a lower machinability and more difficult to machine material? You are used to working steels, and suddenly you have to machine titanium. The same workpiece, but now it's titanium. What would that mean? Well, if you have lower machinability, your costs go up, because you are going to suffer from lower tool life. But you as a machinist, you can compensate for that. And here I think we are more in line with your experience. At least when I look around, when I'm in workshops, when I have discussions with machining people, it's a general principle. More difficult to machine materials, we reduce cutting conditions. And indeed, from an economic perspective, that's the correct way to go. What would you expect when you can work with bigger depths of cuts and feeds? And here I'm already a little bit into strategy thinking, machining strategy thinking. I'm going to come back within a couple of minutes to that aspect. But if you have a possibility to increase depths of cut and or feeds, that's going to reduce your costs. That's going to give you a possibility to machine cheaper. And you as a machinist, you can make the advantage even bigger by compensating bigger depths of cuts and feeds with lower cutting speeds. So if you start to think in terms, and now we are basically into machining strategy thinking, if you can find combinations that gives you the possibility, combinations of tools and strategies that gives you the possibility to increase feeds, to increase depths of cut, and combine that with lower cutting speeds, that's going to give you serious possibilities to reduce costs. And now you should think on this scenario and go a few slides back. If your energy costs go up, your general machining costs go up. Now, you can compensate that, I said, by increasing cutting speeds. But if you think one step beyond that, if you think in the next step, you can even do better, and that is that you increase depths of cuts and feeds and reduce cutting speeds. But that is where we start to use compensation principles in machining. If you have longer unplanned production stops, what would that mean for your cost? If you have stops because there are unplanned things taking place, you miss something, you need to look for it, you break a tool, you have to stop the machine because ships are too long, all that type of stuff. Well, that means that means that your costs go up. And if your costs go up, how can you compensate for that? Or at least partly by increasing cutting conditions. So unplanned stops on a machine tool increase machining costs. But you as a machinist, if you stop the machine for 10 seconds, it was not planned, but anyway you did it, you have to compensate for a while by speeding up. You have to gain back the lost time is a bit the principle here. What if you are confronted with longer setup times? And now this is an interesting scenario because, when batch sizes get lower and lower and lower, automatically people are confronted in an overall perspective with longer setup times. And longer setup times, what does it mean for costs? If you need 2 hours to prepare a machine tool for the next batch instead of 1 hour, what is that going to do for your costs? But I think if you think on this, it's obviously that is going to create higher cost levels, because even if the machine tool is standing still because she's in setup, there are still costs related to the machine. And the intriguing thing is, and this is something you should be very much aware of, as a machinist, in how you select your cutting conditions afterwards, there is nothing you can do. Increasing cutting conditions would make things worse. Reduce cutting conditions would make things also worse. All the costs, all the time you spend on setup, it was on the tip of my tongue to say you lose in setup, But yeah, setup is needed, but let's say you spend on setup is costs which you cannot recuperate during the actual machining. I think setup time deserve more attention in a machining workshop. People always thinking, oh, setup, yeah, we need to do setup. Yeah, but there are already lots of costs are made, and you can't do anything to recover them. What if you need longer time to index inserts? You are cutting, suddenly you have to stop because the tool is worn out, you have to change the cutting edge. If you need more time to change cutting edges, what would that do with the cost? And now if you, and I hope the illustration gives you an idea, you know here you truly have the butterfly effect. Because depending on situation by situation, we can see that in some cases, a longer setup time reduces costs. In other cases, it increases. It's difficult to say something. In general, but it's just very general. In general, we could say if you need more time to set up or to index your cutting edges, you need to compensate that by lowering your cutting conditions. But again, I call that the butterfly thing here. It's not sure. It can situation by situation be different. If I try to come a bit to a conclusion, economic machining. It starts with the things you need to have. You need to have the best possible machining expert, machining system, tooling, and process environment. The situation needs to be as favorable as possible. You need to make sure, that's why people are so important, that your machining process is reliable, controllable, predictable. There is not too much of butterfly effects going on in the process. You need to be in charge. You need to define what is most important for you. Is it cost or is it time? Or, see the previous session, it could also be that you go for quality or efficiency or whatever. First of all is to select an appropriate machining strategy, and I would like to draw your attention here on the next live event series we are going to start here on social media, where we are going specifically to dive into this subject, machining strategies. What are machining strategies? How do we select them? How can we take advantage from different strategies? And so on. That's a crucial step in the chain. Once you have done that, then it's about selecting tools that gives you the possibility to maximize depths of cuts and feeds. See one of the examples we went through. You have to balance depth of cut and feed in such a way that you have a reliable process, that your ship formation is under control, that you don't have vibration issues, that you don't have problems with big wear paces and stuff like that. So depth of cut and feed needs to be very carefully balanced. And in the fifth step then, the cutting speed, and very strange, but cutting speed is indeed the last step in the chain. Then you use your cutting speed to final calibrate. Kind of the first 4 steps is creating the big picture, and the fine-tuning in the end you do with your cutting speed. But as I said, we plan for a number of sessions specifically on machining strategies, and how you should work with them, and what variables there are. And by the way, this economic machining thing, I said it in the beginning, that there are quite some people here in Seco Germany, because everybody is preparing for a big event we have on Wednesday, where we aim for the automotive and general engineering industry segments. And a big subject in the background of all the things people are organizing here is going to be just that economic machining thinking. How do we select tools? How do we select strategies? How do we select cutting conditions? How do we select tooling solutions to do certain machining processes in such a way that they are, of course, technical okay, that we have reliable processes, but also that from an economic perspective, they are the best possible solution, or being it from a cost perspective, or a productivity perspective, or an efficiency perspective, or an energy efficiency perspective, whatever scenario you prioritize in your situation. With that, I'm roughly where I wanted to be, what I wanted to explain. Just a few words, because I showed you some formulas, and I know people in general, the moment they see formulas and mathematics, that's the moment they kind of step back and say, ooh, this is not for me. But people, I would say, don't be afraid of formulas, don't be afraid of mathematics. But I do realize that, your boss pays you to do machining, not to make calculations. But in the present world, life is so easy with all the digital solutions we have. The calculation is leave that to the experts, to the computers. You do the intelligent part. You are there to make sure that you are critical related to what is coming out of the calculations, and that you understand things. And hopefully we are going to have the possibility to come back. But what I try to give you with these examples here is that a sustainable machining production, it's about the processes, machining processes, the tooling you use. It should be a constant challenging. But it goes further. It's also about increase your machine utilization. Do whatever possible that the spindles are running. You remember the example where I said if your setup time goes up, you spend money you can never recover with whatever tool or whatever cutting conditions you select. It's money which is lost. So focus on that. Try to make sure the spindles are running. Be very careful with unexpected downtimes, because there are quite a lot of them in machining. And it's all is only a few seconds, I know, and a few seconds but a few seconds here and a few seconds there makes a lot of few seconds, and it ends up in minutes, in hours, in days. And I stop with what I started. People is the key. People need to realize how value is built, value for the customer through your machining production. They have to know how it goes. They have to recognize when the value creation chain breaks. And even more important, they need to know what to do when the value creation chain is broken. That's the role of people in the whole thing. Digital stuff, there are quite a lot of simulation programs. I show you here one example. Perhaps to the right you recognize the graphs we have been using here to focus our thoughts a little bit. But you see on the graphs here quite some more lines, because I have been focusing here on the machine tool cost and the tool cost. But next to that there are some other costs, but then the mathematics are getting so complex that people for sure run away from it. But again here, if you are interested in this type of things, let a message in the chat. With pleasure, we can set up something if you want to see how this works and what you can do with it. But remember, this type of things is not about technical considerations. This is all about economics considerations. And that was the subject of the session of today. Economic machining. How to select a strategy, how to select a tool, how to select cutting conditions. So I minimize the costs related to a machining process or I maximize the productivity of the process. And that is what we discussed. If you decide to increase cutting conditions or to reduce cutting conditions compared to the ones we said these would be the ideal ones for you, that is technically perhaps okay. I'm pretty sure it will be okay and it will work. But that was not what we talked about today. Today we talked about what would happen if you would do that with the economic stuff, the costs and the productivity. I hope the story made sense. It's quite a big subject, but we try to take it step by step just to plant the big idea in your head. I'm pretty sure there are a million further questions around this, and hopefully we have the time left here to take some questions and to see and how we can clarify there where gaps were in the thing. And now I need to find the questions. One question. The equation I was talking about, is that valid for solid tools also? Yes. It's independent of it's about an insert or a solid tool. An insert system or a solid tool. It's one has to be flexible how you find out cutting edge cost and cutting edge support cost. And in solid tools, for instance, you have to give regrinding and costs related to regrinding a place in the equation. But yes, the answer is confirmative. This way of thinking is valid for whatever tool. Then another question. Wait, that's a long one. I need to... A classic, allow me to say a bit, a classic confusion, because I talked a bit about, one of the examples I gave was energy and energy costs. Now, if you focus on energy, be careful first of all, because in the question is about, yeah, but what about power consumption and so on. First of all, power is not the same as energy. Eh? Be careful with that. One could say energy is if I can give you the unit, energy is kilowatt hour. It's power multiplied with time. Power multiplied with time is energy, or energy divided by time is power. So if we talk about energy, we do not talk about power, and we have to be careful. If we start to change cutting conditions, the time needed to do the machining will change also. And then we have to be creative. Then we have to be intelligent, because if energy costs go up, my statement was you have to increase cutting conditions. But at the same time, at first sight, that leads to more power or a higher power consumption. But if you combine things, and the fourth example I gave you was, if I increase my depths of cuts and feeds, I reduce my costs. And you have to combine these two now. And it's about which cutting conditions do you increase and which cutting conditions do you reduce. And in general, the time is too limited to give you the full picture, but I would say, in general, if you are confronted with high energy costs and you worry about power and you worry about extra power, extra energy needed for cooling pumps and stuff like that, which basically should be in the equation for the machine hourly rate, the correct combination is that you have to increase feeds and depths of cut within what is possible. I know there are mechanical limits, but within what is possible, you should go for bigger depths of cut, bigger feed, and combine that with lower cutting speeds. That's the way of thinking that you should use in that situation. The third question. Is there a way to take into account margins so that we'll... Maximized profit. That's an interesting scenario. I haven't talked about that because maximized profit depends on what you call profit. Because normally in how you manage a manufacturing plant, in how you manage a machining workshop, we should be aware, and it's a dimension we didn't talk about today, but we should be aware of the fact that machining is not the only thing that costs money. Yeah? There are other cost factors, there are other time-consuming factors next to pure machining. If you look to the time spending of a machine, part of the time the machine is standing still because she's in setup, part of the time because workpieces are put on or off the machine, part of the time because there is measuring cycles going on, part of the time because there is a problem that needs to be solved, part of the time because there is some administration work that needs to be done or certain routines need to be followed. And if you dive deep into that, profit maximization is very little depending on the actual machining. Profit maximization is a lot depending on the things you do around machining. But as I said, it's a dimension we didn't take into consideration today. But while you are asking the question, or while I'm reading the question, you give me an idea that it could perhaps be an interesting subject for an upcoming session. What about beyond machining costs and beyond machining times? Well, what would be the next step that we should take into consideration then? So I can't, to give you a concrete answer, if you want to maximize profits, machining is not really going to give you a lot. You can go for minimum cost, and if you go for minimum cost, that gives you possibilities to at least gain profit on the machining itself. But as I said, the majority of your profit will come from things beyond machining. The next question. Apart from tool life and machining process, if I'm right, please correct me, the component material and its condition during machine. It's the example I gave you. It's machinability of the workpiece material. Very, very correct. This is not a question, this is a statement you make, and it's a very correct statement that the machining, the workpiece material you machine play a very important role. You remember the two little formulas? The economic tool life maximum production, I said the first factor, that 1 divided by m minus 1, but that's the material, that's the workpiece material. There you have your impact from that on the total picture. Can I give deeper insight on how increased machining conditions might increase cost? Yes, I can, but I'm limited in time here. Can we continue this discussion afterwards? The one who asked the question, leave a message in the chat, and we get in contact and we go through all the details together. Because as I said, I have to keep my eyes on the watch a bit, and it would take us too far. Is there any better cutting fluid for higher cutting speed? I guess the general answer is yes, because cutting fluid selection, which cutting fluid you use, is very much depending, is driven by the cutting environment, the process conditions, the temperatures you will have, the pressures you will have, and your cutting fluid, the composition of it, the additions you do into the cutting fluid, are modified when your working conditions are different. Yes, I don't know if I should say the word better, but cutting fluid should be in line with cutting speed you use, cutting conditions in general, I would say. But it's also depending on the workpiece material you machine. It's also depending on the machine tool. It's also depending on the application, cutting fluid. That's the subject on it. Again, here, it's an interesting idea, perhaps, to spend some time once on that. And the next question, the more products you get out the door, the more you can cancel that. Sorry, I do not really understand what the question is here. So please put some extra things and I come back to it. Question number 8, energy consumption. Energy seems to be a hot item in the machining nowadays. Does the specific energy consumption per unit volume of material removed remain constant across a range of cutting parameters? No. First of all, specific energy consumption is very heavily depending on workpiece material. And secondly, the specific energy consumption is influenced by the actual deformation process during machining. And when you have a smoother deformation process or a less smoother deformation process, your energy per cubic whatever material removed will modify. So specific energy consumption, it's a bit like in the mechanical thinking what we refer to as the specific cutting forces. It is valid for a certain material, it is valid for a certain cutting tool. The geometry mainly is playing an important role, and it is to some extent depending on the cutting conditions you use the cutting tool with. So specific energy is, one could say, it's a material constant, but there is a window in which a certain value works. If you leave the window, the value changes. Question, I have some time left. Energy consumption factor, do we factor in how big or small the spindle? Yes. To some extent, yes. But I would say energy, here we have to be a bit careful about which energy we talk about. I would say how well the energy is transformed from the energy that comes from the electricity net into mechanical available energy at a spindle. That is the main factor here. So if a spindle is big or small is perhaps less important. It's more about the quality of the spindle, the condition in which the spindle is. That is an important one. Question 10. If we increase the cutting conditions to compensate higher energy costs, won't it increase tool wear and lead to increased tooling cost? Or do we need to find some sort of balance? That's two questions. The first answer, the first question, if we increase cutting conditions to compensate for the higher energy costs, of course it will reduce tool life, it will increase the wear rate on the cutting edge, and if you have increased wear rate, tool life will be shorter, and that will lead to increased tooling costs. Yes, absolutely. But what we strive for, and in the second question, the key word is balance. What we strive for is a new balance between machine costs, machine tool costs, and think the energy cost and the tooling cost. But the new balance will be, as we said at the moment, when we were discussing that, the new balance will be, normally, if you don't change the tool, the new balance will be a higher cost. But again, I leave it for you as a question. Think on it. If you are confronted with higher energy costs, you need to find a new balance. The new balance is that your costs will be higher, and you will have to increase your cutting speeds to hopefully compensate, at least partly, for the higher energy costs. But it still will be higher cost. As a machinist, and I told it twice during this session, but as a machinist, you have to think one step further. The next step is that you think on the other element, which was what would happen if I increase my depths of cuts and feeds. And then you make the opposite movement. And you know, being confronted with high energy costs is thinking in terms of potentially, how do I change my tooling in such a way that I have the possibility to select a strategy, but now I'm talking already for the next session. But anyway, as a little teaser then perhaps, if I'm confronted with higher energy costs, what I can do is I modify my strategy and I make sure I have a tool that follows the strategy that gives me the possibility to increase depths of cuts and feeds. And that I combine with a lower cutting speed. And then the dilemma where the gentleman asking question 10 is confronted with is taken care of. That's here I'm again the value of the machinist and insights he has in the technical side of machining and in the economic side of machining. Sorry. A last question, because I see time is running out, but the last question for today. The other questions I didn't have the time to answer. I promise you, as I did before, that afterwards I go through all the questions and try to give you an as good as possible answer. The question number 11 is, can we do a session on process capability? Yes, that's a good suggestion. That would be an interesting one. Where is Alasia? I don't know, Alasia. Yes, very good. That's not a question. Consider that as a suggestion which is full-heartedly adopted by Ans. We plan for a session on process capability. Will be a very interesting one. Having said that, that means we are at the end of this session. Again, I hope on behalf of my colleagues and myself that we spend an interesting hour together here, that we elaborated a bit on economic machining, one of the scenarios which are defined in machining economics. Yeah, a bit confusing words here, but yeah, that's how it is. Where we focus on cost, where we focus on time, and where we ask ourselves the question, how can we set up a machining process? How can we select a strategy? How can we select a tool? How can we select cutting conditions so we minimize the costs related to the machining process, or maximize the productivity, the output of the machining process? A warning finger though, there is also the beyond the machining process. The next step is that we have to realize that machining is not the only thing a machine tool does. Other activities, and we lift a little bit the tip of the blanket here. We talked a bit about what is the impact of setup times, what is the impact of unexpected standstill times and stuff like that. And that is then a next level. But next session we are going to talk about milling strategies. That thing in red in the middle, you remember my list there, the thing in the middle, the strategy selection. How do we select strategies and should we care about that really? Is it really so important, or is it one of those things people think it's funner to talk about? Well, let me say it's fun. For sure it's fun, but it's very important also. Thank you very much for today. Looking forward to see you next time.